Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Okay, hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? We're going to try this one more time with our microphones. If it doesn't work this time, the show's over forever. We're just not going to be able to figure out how to bring things back if the levels aren't better today. I've got a couple of dials I can turn today. Looks like everything's okay so far, at least on Justice's side. At least he hears us. That's the good news. I think that the setup that we've got here has given me the ability to turn back the dials a little bit on the microphones. I turned down the gain on the microphone itself. All the virtual apps appear to be in working order, although I had a scary moment there this morning. I couldn't hear my audio from my fabulous soundboard app. And, still working out the kinks here. We got a little error message here that tells me somehow that two versions of Skype are running, although, of course, we know from yesterday that only one version of Skype actually works on this computer. But I guess that I've opened the application twice somehow, at least in the eyes of one of the audio capture apps. It says it'll still work, but you may not get the results you want. So I'm not certain what that's supposed to mean. Like, for instance, the app works, but Joan McCarter might not call. And that's likely to be the case today. We are, of course, in the middle of the 15th iteration of Zombie Trump Care. It is moving on the Senate floor. We did see yesterday afternoon, you all were likely either watching or getting live updates one way or another. Scott Anderson, I have second source confirmation. Everything sounds great here. I dialed back the my microphone input to about 70% or so, and I can still boost the Skype input in case we get a call in and that call sounds a little bit weak, but maybe this time the balance will be better. The gain is down. Okay, sounds good. Sounds like we have things under control with respect to the equipment working anyway. As to whether or not we're going to have things under control for the content of the show, well, why are you tuning in if you think we're going to do that? You've got the wrong radio show. Sorry, everybody. Yes, we did see last evening the, I guess, success of the motion to proceed to the consideration of a bill purporting to repeal Obamacare, at least in part, sort of, kind of maybe almost replace it in bits and pieces with something that Mitch McConnell came up with, but maybe some other things that he came up with and didn't tell you about, et cetera, et cetera. The historic moment yesterday. We'll see whether things have changed at all this morning, but I doubt it. But as you no doubt became aware at some point yesterday, the motion to proceed was brought to the floor. It passed on a vote of 50-50, tie-breaking vote, the 51st vote being cast by Vice President Mike Pence, because they can do that, you see. But everybody was waiting on John McCain to return to Washington, D.C. after a week-plus absent, following a procedure for a brain tumor and an aggressive form of brain cancer. And, everyone all eyes were on him. Would he return? Would he leave his treatment behind, leave his sickbed, essentially, to come to Washington, D.C. and cast his vote to help strip the rest of America of its health care, even as the rest of America paid for his? John McCain, you may recall, is a member of the Republican Party. And, of course, he did do that. He was willing to do that, and he showed up and did so, and then gave by some accounts, fiery or even leonine, how would you say, what's the word? A lion-like speech described as a lion's roar by Robert Costa, who is, of course, a Republican and a conservative-leaning columnist. Usually, gives us a pretty good view straight on of the story. But Washington punditry received his speech in glowing terms, that he had laid out some sort of vision for the future of the Senate in which we would return to bipartisanship and working together and putting the good of the country before the good of the parties. And substance-wise, it was garbage. I mean, it was good. Apparently the words in the speech were very interesting and inspiring, but they had nothing whatsoever to do with how McCain was voting. He, of course, showed up, validated the horrific procedure, the horrific departures from regular order that this bill embodied. Remember, what we're talking about here is first and foremost, they're gutting Medicaid, throwing poor people into the gutter again, essentially, and taking away all hope of their being able to access decent care, in addition to which they are destroying a system that's working relatively well in terms of its goals anyway. And we can argue with its goals and those goals not being broad enough, etc. But it seems to be doing most of the job it was designed to be doing. And, of course, destroying that. On top of all of that, and the damage it does to people substantively by jeopardizing their care, it was... they bent over backwards to try and cram this thing into reconciliation form because they knew that the Senate, which both John McCain and Mitch McConnell supposedly revere above all else in the brilliance of its design, which they have been on record so many times when they were called Lions of the Senate, as saying essentially required bipartisanship and a coming together of the various factions in the country in order to manufacture consent, to borrow a phrase that they probably didn't think I was going to borrow on, but to make law. In other words, the Senate that required 60 votes, which, I didn't think was always all that great and didn't really produce results that were all that great and didn't really reflect the it had a negative effect, I think, on the way we perceive the results of elections in this country. But that's an even more abstract issue we can deal with another day. But they were big fans of the 60-vote Senate, or so they said. We'll see about whether that remains the case in the coming months during this majority Republican Senate. But the claim was always that they liked the 60-vote barrier because it forced policy consensus. And the only thing that would make it out of the Senate and make it to the president's desk and become law was policy consensus. So, of course, they don't have that. And they will never get it for any bill that guts Medicaid this way, that abandons the needy in this way, and jeopardizes the health insurance stability of everyone else who is lucky enough not to be poor and needy, but to do so for political points. And because we promised we would, that's terrible. As your mother might once have said to you, because your friends promised to jump off the George Washington Bridge, you also are going. The rest of the country probably doesn't do things in terms of the George Washington Bridge, right? Do you all have regional high structures that your parents challenge you to think independently over when your friends say they're going to jump off of those things? I don't know. For me, it was always the George Washington Bridge. Why it wasn't the Empire State Building or later the World Trade Center, I have no idea. But my parents aren't fabulists. They simply say, I think the George Washington Bridge would do just fine in terms of, all right. Anyway, they bent over backwards to cram their policy into reconciliation shape because they knew they would never get anywhere near the 60 votes that are supposed to represent political consensus. Instead, though, they came out with a bill that barely managed to get, and we haven't even seen the end result yet. It may not even get the agreement of a majority of the Senate. I mean, as far as our normal definition of the Senate goes, this didn't get an agreement to the majority of the Senate. It got exactly half of the Senate, and we had to bring in the vice president in his capacity as president of the Senate to break the tie. And that was just on the motion to proceed. So it still may be the case that in the end, they simply never get a majority vote to pass whatever comes out of this process. But again, I've not made it all the way through my first thought of the day, which is typical for the show. Those of you who've been listening a long time know that to be the case. But they bent over backwards to rewrite policy such that it would fit under reconciliation because they knew they couldn't get a political consensus anywhere near 60 for this thing. In addition to all of that, they wrote it in secret, and it's not even a they, it's a matter of Mitch McConnell cobbling the thing together in secret, sharing almost no information with even his own members of his own Republican conference about what was going to be in it and what wasn't, and which version of it would come to the floor. It was really just a total abandonment of anything resembling even a closed and horrible legislative process. This was nothing like it. In addition to all of this, they bring this bill to the floor under Rule 14 so that there would be no committee considerations, no opportunity to amend it, no opportunity to examine it at the committee level as to what's in it. So through all of this, this is probably the most egregious example of terrible departure from regular order that McCain supposedly blasted in his masterful and historical speech, and so many of Washington's pundits were unwilling to compare his words to his immediately previous deed and subsequent deeds as well, because he was also on hand for votes to ratify likewise secret and darkly crafted and legislation that departed from the regular order in ways that, you might as well, it's not even worth describing the order that these things took place under. It's so far from regular order and the way we were all taught bill making was supposed to be as to be ridiculous. I think I can encapsulate the things this way, just finally, and get off of this thing. So, just a complete shock to the system in terms of watching in real time what was unfolding and then reading the punditry about it. It was like we existed on two different planets. Not terribly surprising in the sense that this happens all the time, and that's what Washington punditry is about. It'll be very interesting to see what the final result is. Of course, it'll be more interesting if we can see that the final result is that the bill is ultimately defeated and we don't have to deal with this dismantling of our healthcare system. But it'll be very interesting to see, for instance, whether the predictions of the punditry who were convinced to take some account of how McCain was voting with respect to the speech he had delivered, like, for instance, Chuck Todd, who felt certain, along with Bill Kristol, that the speech and the following his first vote on the motion to proceed, that the speech was really all about rhetorically setting up his eventual rejection of the legislation on final passage, and that it was all a setup. I'm laying the groundwork for departing from Republicans, for parting ways with Trump, and defeating this legislation based on all of the high-minded principles outlined in my speech. But the voting record from the remainder of the night didn't bear that out either, as McCain was on hand to cast votes in favor of the McConnell version of the bill, or the original McConnell version of the bill, and the original version of the House bill as well. He's voting, in other words, in favor of the bill that he has said numerous times he cannot support in its current form, and he's now supported that bill in that current form twice, substantively speaking, with his votes. And I don't know. I mean, I guess it's not going to cost Chuck Todd anything to have been totally wrong. Certainly, we all know that never costs Bill Kristol anything to be totally wrong. And I assume it will likewise cost Chuck Todd nothing either. You know, it's a risky business being a pundit, and you're probably wrong more than you're right. And I guess we'd be going through pundits like I don't know what if we were replacing them every time they were wrong. But I don't know that that's a bad thing. I think we might all be in favor of that as well. Anyway, moving on and trying to find a way through today's presentation. It's going to be rather tough. I know so many things are going on the floor, and it's going to be a shame that we're unable to bring Joan McCarter in all likelihood, to have this discussion because so much is happening, and she's got to essentially man the front page and tell the rest of you who decide to get your daily Kos in written form every morning. And I'm not certain why you do that when there's the radio to turn to, but people have their preferences. I won't argue with you for very long. I have 2 hours. It's a relative thing. But she's got to be on top of all the developments and to make sure that the many of you who turn to the written side have the latest information and analysis on what's going on. And I don't, so we might as well turn that way too. Oops, uh-oh. Of course, I did it in a way that opened things up in a totally different window. And I'll see if I can get that all in the right place and sort of organize my thoughts as we move along here. Let's see. Oh, Bill in Portland, Maine, of course, gave us his morning tweet, and I let it slide by after a quick retweet. Let's see what I'm supposed to do today. Daily Kos Radio is live now. We're live, going on about 16 minutes now. Kagro X, that's me. Hi, everybody. I'm David Waldman, host of the show, in case you're just joining us. I reveal that the GOP's Affordable Care Act replacement is just a coffee-stained Chick-fil-A menu, and that may be the case. You know, Bill, you make an excellent procedural point. Were you aware that you were making such a point? If you were not, congratulations. If you were, well, okay, congratulations for that, too. That was a bad setup. Anyway, what do we mean by a good procedural point in offering nothing but a coffee-stained Chick-fil-A menu as an alternative to the Affordable Care Act? Bottom line, as we've been explaining for a long time, there is no telling exactly what Mitch McConnell will bring at the very end of this process. Quick reminder, working under reconciliation, we are statutorily limited to 20 hours of debate on the bill. That 20 hours started after finishing up, well, really after McCain finished his mini speech after the motion to proceed yesterday. 20 hours, and it can run pretty much any way they want to run it. This can be 20 hours just by the clock, and they can keep the Senate in session 24 hours and just run the clock overnight. It can be the 20 hours that they're actually physically in session and on the floor, so they can stop the clock overnight if they wish. I am not even certain what they did. But once you get to the end of the statutorily capped 20 hours, if there are still amendments to the bill pending, and they have been properly filed and printed in the record, and that is what is usually required, although who knows what they're going to try and engineer with the rules, you're still entitled to a vote on your amendment, even though the 20 hours is up. The way they deal with that is they say, well, okay, we're now no longer debating the bill, we're discussing amendments, but we still want to honor the spirit of the 20-hour cap, and you have basically a minimal amount of time, and in some cases it's a minute or 2 minutes. Sometimes they'll get a unanimous consent agreement together about how long each amendment can be discussed. One senator speaking in favor of it, describing what's in it. One speaker offering a rebuttal before a vote is held. But everybody who has properly filed their amendments is entitled to a vote despite the 20 hours having expired. They just try and do them as quickly as possible and in rapid succession, and you're voting basically every couple of minutes after literally sometimes 1 minute of debate in favor and 1 minute of debate in opposition, and then 15 minutes or so spent on voting. And if people bring reams and reams of amendments, this is something that can go on around the clock, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. When they do these voteramas, as they call them, on the budget, which operates under similar procedure, these can sometimes go on all day long. The longest you tend to see in a voterama on the budget, on average, it really will go about 20 hours, perhaps 24 hours. And it's cause for an overnight, all-night session with cots set up in the cloakrooms, etc., and senators taking naps here and again. It's pretty rigorous. I don't know if that's in the cards for this bill. It could be, and it should be, and it once was part of the thinking anyway about how they were going to approach this bill strategically when it was happening before the July 4th recess, and the thinking was that we would like to see a final vote on passage of this bill, whatever, well, it's not this bill, but whatever the Republicans at that point had hoped to offer by way of Affordable Care Act repeal. And we wanted to delay it to after the July 4th recess to give constituents another chance to pressure their senators during the district work period, as they like to call recesses these days. And people began thinking, well, what if we just came to the floor with hundreds and hundreds of amendments and stretched things out to where Mitch McConnell was forced to decide whether to keep people in session during the recess, working 24/7 until we made it all the way through all these things, or just give up and say we'll come back and vote after the July 4th recess. We never had to get to that point because they never managed to bring anything to the floor before the July 4th recess. But all of the planning, if there was any, about those amendments and how to use them to delay things should still be available now, if they ever went through with the planning on it. What good would that be now? Well, we are only about a week or two away from the end of July, and therefore the beginning of August, and therefore the traditional beginning of the August recess, which usually lasts the entire month. I don't know when they originally planned to break for that recess, and I don't know whether they had planned to do that after this weekend or perhaps after next weekend. Sometimes they'll work the first couple days of August and then take the rest of the month from there. But it's possible that we might have executed a strategy like this to try and push the final vote on final passage into or past the August recess. But I don't think anybody was giving that serious consideration since, one, we may be more than a week away from that happening anyway, and two, Mitch McConnell was at some point threatening to hold people into the August recess to finish up work on the thing. Anyway, although really he was thinking about keeping people for the recess, or keeping people from leaving for recess to get some other work done as well, some appropriations work and important budgetary work, and I don't know whether that has fallen by the wayside. Anyway, you could still use the reams and reams of amendments to make things difficult, in particular for John McCain, who, of course, though he made it back in time to cast this vote on the motion to proceed and for a couple of the first votes on various amendments on this bill, it's got to be on somebody's mind that it's not particularly healthy for a patient battling an aggressive brain cancer and recovering from surgery to be up around the clock and voting every 10 to 15 minutes on hundreds and hundreds of amendments. It's an awfully stressful thing to do, and it's physically demanding even for the senators who are not speaking at the time, just staying on the floor. And yeah, they have cots and everything, and they can make themselves more comfortable than they might otherwise be, either sitting in their chairs or milling about on the Senate floor. But it's not quality bed rest, and it's not terribly. I would think the conditions are probably not optimal for somebody in John McCain's condition, and it might be physically demanding in a way that a really, really, really long series of votes, continuous series of votes on continuous and unending number of amendments might become too physically demanding for John McCain to stick around for. And if you can, quite honestly, you want to talk about hardball tactics, you could run this thing around the clock and keep going until McCain checks out and heads to the hospital, and then say, okay, now we can have final passage vote. We're going to waive consideration of the rest of our amendments. John McCain's hospitalized. He's not coming back. He may, I guess. He could force himself to turn around. But, is that cold? Yeah, you bet it's cold. Is that unreasonable? Yeah, in a certain sense, certainly. Is that something that they wouldn't do to colleagues? That may be the only thing that stops them from doing something. Well, that and I guess finding the gumption to do this in the first place. But that will upset them, no doubt. And they might overcome it by thinking, well, McCain made this tremendous effort to come and take the vote and everything, but remember what he's doing with this vote. He's threatening the lives and health care coverage of thousands, millions of people around the country. And, if you can't do the job, maybe you need to hand the keys over to somebody else. And it's entirely, look, you'll be replaced by a Republican. What's your problem? You don't trust anybody else? And, okay, yes, Pete, with a reminder for us here. Thanks to Christina Reynolds, who said Senator Hirono cast her vote after a second surgery battling stage 4 cancer. I think that deserves a standing ovation. Did she get that, by the way? I don't know that I saw anybody applaud for her appearance on the floor the way they did with McCain. But maybe it was because she didn't make an historical speech. And then, of course, Michael Musson reminding us it does take a lot of work to give a speech condemning each amendment before voting yes. And that's some additional psychic stress on top of the physical stress of just standing there to do the work. Anyway, I don't know. I can't answer the question that Pete posed earlier. After all the violations of regular order, how could it be that Chuck Schumer didn't force every last minute of delay to happen? Yeah. Well, sometimes I don't know. Sometimes I know and sometimes I don't. They do occasionally come to the conclusion that though they could delay for a while, it's sometimes not worth it in terms of the substantive outcome. I would think that they could have put up a bigger fuss immediately before the motion to proceed vote, but I think that they had decided for whatever reason that the strategy they wanted to employ was to simply withhold their votes and force all Republicans to vote first on the motion to proceed. I don't know why they thought that was particularly dramatic, but I guess it focused attention on the last votes to come in. But you would think, for instance, if you really wanted to delay things and a matter of hours meant something to you, although at that point you were just helping delay the vote while they waited for John McCain to arrive. So I'm not certain that really helped a great deal. That was what the Republicans wanted as well. They just wanted to hold the vote open until McCain arrived. But certainly with all the procedural departures, let's say, from regular order, you could probably think of a couple dozen, if not a couple hundred, parliamentary inquiries you might have made at that stage if you really wanted to delay things. And there's really no reason why they couldn't have made those. Why not spend, now that you know that John McCain has got his plane in the air, and that's why Mitch McConnell has begun debate on the motion to proceed, just before getting to the vote on the motion to proceed, why not a marathon series of parliamentary inquiries at that point and let John McCain arrive and then cool his heels for 6-7 hours in the chamber stewing over the historic speech he can hardly wait to make before voting yes on the motion to proceed, and see if that gets him cranky, irritated, and tired. Just see if it works. I don't know. Sometimes I just can't. I can't figure out why they don't do some of these things. Pete says he was thinking about forcing a reading of the bill, and they did do that, actually. I don't know whether they finally assented to dispensing with the further reading of the bill, but my understanding is that they once they passed the motion to proceed, that they did ask for a reading of bill and objected to waiving the reading of the bill, at least with respect to the first amendment to the bill that came up. And I did see commentators say, oh, well, Democrats are using delaying tactics now, forcing a reading of the bill that's being offered first as an amendment to the underlying bill. And I wondered aloud on Twitter there, is that really a delaying tactic? I mean, it's often used as a delaying tactic. That may be the purpose of it right now. But remember that a lot of the material that's going to be offered as the base bill and as amendments to the bill is actually mostly unknown, at least to the public. Is it really just a delaying tactic to request that the bill be read aloud once in public so that people who weren't in on the writing of it can have some sense of what's in it? I don't know if they're really going to gain any sense of what's in it from the reading of the legislative language, but that's all we've got. So I don't know. I don't know whether that registered with anybody either. So let's see. Where they stand now, I'm not even certain what exactly is happening at the very moment that we're speaking, what's happening on C-SPAN 2. I can only monitor so many channels at once here. But let's take a look at what Joan's got. Since she's not going to be able to be with us on the radio, we might as well read what she's writing on the front page. Senate Republicans move on to Trump care chaos with one goal in mind, giving it up to the House. Yeah, remember when we talked about that coffee-stained Chick-fil-A menu? The goal here at the moment appears to be just getting to the motion to proceed so that the Senate can send something, anything, and it really literally does not matter what, back to the House. As long as they use the House's legislative vehicle with the same bill number, that is, and I don't know what the bill number is, but whatever HR, whatever it is, that the House sent over to the Senate, as long as the Senate votes to send the same vehicle with whatever content back to the House, they can then opt for a conference committee between members of the House and members of the Senate to work out a compromise conference report on the bill that would then go back to both chambers to be voted on. So the House passes what purports to be a health care bill, and if the Senate were to say, strike everything in the bill and replace it with this, literally with this coffee-stained Chick-fil-A menu, as long as it went back under the same bill number, HR, whatever it happens to be, there would then be the opportunity for the House and Senate to vote to convene a conference committee, and they would send representatives from each house, and there's procedure for that, and there are floor votes for that, and floor votes that can become contentious, or in some cases where the filibuster is applicable, even be blocked. But if you can get to a vote to convene a conference on both sides, and it may not be possible to filibuster conference motions on a conference report on a reconciliation bill. I think they were pretty thorough in writing those instructions back in the day. Byrd didn't miss too much. But the two sides can convene a conference and say, well, as between the House's, what did they call theirs? BCRA? Or was that the Senate version of things? I think the Senate had a different version. Or was it the American Health Care? I don't remember what name they settled on in the on the House side. Anyway, as between the House bill and this coffee-stained Chick-fil-A menu, what shall we offer up as a conference report, as a final version for the two houses to vote on? And they may very well at that point say, well, everything in this coffee-stained Chick-fil-A menu is bad health policy. We don't really know why the Senate passed it, but we disagree with their judgment. And at which point the Senate conferees say, me too, I don't know what I was thinking. So, with the possible exception of the milkshake, I would think nothing on here makes any sense. But even so, in the context of healthcare, milkshake probably not a particularly good idea. We're willing to get rid of that as well. As long as the conferees can then agree, they could very well say, all right, well then, the last best thing we've got here is we're going to send the House bill unchanged. The House wins on every single point of contention as between the House healthcare bill, which isn't a healthcare bill, and this Chick-fil-A menu. The House shall prevail. And that is the judgment of all of our conferees. We're unanimous in that, except for the Democratic representatives to the conference. There will be Democratic representatives to the conference. They'll just be outvoted. And so this wins. The menu loses, and not necessarily because of the coffee stain, but it loses nonetheless. And the House and Senate at that point would be presented with one more opportunity to take it or leave it. The House, of course, should, in theory, be willing to accept exactly what they sent into conference the first time. They haven't given an inch of ground to the Senate in the conference, in this hypothetical, I guess I should say. And the Senate will say, well, although we lost on every point, admittedly, that coffee-stained Chick-fil-A menu that we sent to conference was terrible as healthcare policy. Although it was, I think, by comparison, slightly more popular than the House healthcare bill, because, even though people are boycotting Chick-fil-A, chicken, it's edible. People eat it. They have the cute cows doing the ads. And again, the milkshakes are extraordinarily popular. People love them. Even if they're bad for them and they back up bad social policy, it's probably, they're tasty and probably more popular than the House healthcare bill on a whole. But even so, we'll give ground. We lost on everything, but at least this other thing is allegedly, it's taken the form of a healthcare policy. It looks like a bill. This menu doesn't. It has a coffee stain on it. So if the Senate were then to decide, well, look, it's either accept this or accept defeat. Go back and say we couldn't repeal Obamacare, we couldn't get it together, we have no substitute. They've been doing that for 7 years, but maybe they're tired of it and feel like they can't do it again. That's what they're counting on. That's all they've got. So then the question would be, well, senators, which one of you is going to cast the vote, since it's so close and could be 50-50 again? Which one of you would dare to, at the end of this long, drawn-out process, say, I'll be the one that goes on record and says no to this whole stupid repeal and replace thing after all of these years, in the face of what will undoubtedly be vicious threats from the president, too? Could someone find the spine to do it? Sure. Will they? That's what McConnell's betting on. They're betting that they won't. And so there may be a strategy of sending almost anything. Now, in all likelihood, it won't be a menu from Chick-fil-A or any other fast food restaurant, or fast casual, as they like to try and disguise it now, but it's fast food. In all likelihood, they'll try and send them something that looks a little bit more like a healthcare policy. And it may come down to this thing which they are, I don't know, for whatever reason, calling skinny repeal, which is essentially just, we'll repeal bits and pieces of Obamacare, the parts we don't like, or sometimes the parts that even Democrats acknowledge ought to be, if not repealed, and then at least very heavily reformed. And the strategy being that it won't be hard to find a majority vote for a very targeted and very limited number of tax repeals and policy repeals from the Affordable Care Act, because all Republicans are opposed to those things, and even many Democrats are willing to question those provisions. Now, it's not comprehensive repeal, and it's not even any sort of hint at what should replace the Affordable Care Act. And it's not stable policy either, because in many cases it could be entirely possible, and I think the healthcare analysts know this better than I do, that some of the provisions that would be repealed that everybody can agree either to repeal or to revise, that without a replacement in place, it causes the collapse of the existing system, and that would be just fine with Republicans and a horrible outcome for Democrats. And presumably Democrats that can see that coming will vote against the package of repeals, even where they were themselves otherwise in a vacuum, in favor of reconsidering or even repealing some of the Affordable Care Act's measures. But the strategy here is it would be a relatively non-controversial proposition among Republicans, and they therefore get a majority vote for it, and therefore produce some paperwork to send back to the House and then request a conference on. Now, technically, something about conference committees that we're supposed to know, that technically the rules are that conferences are, the subject matter addressed in conference is technically supposed to be limited to those areas of disagreement that exist between the two versions of the bill. Now, what does that mean becomes another issue. Sometimes it's easy to tell. One bill says there will be $1 million appropriated for this program, and the other bill says there will be $2 million appropriated for this program. The limitation there is, as between $1 and $2 million, how much money will the conference report suggest be spent on this program? The answer could be $1 million. The answer could be $2 million. It could be anywhere in between. It's not supposed to be anywhere beyond $2 million. I think it's permissible, but it might even technically be a violation of the usual conference rules to say, well, we'll do $900,000. But usually you can usually find a waiver on the floor and support for that waiver if you're cutting the budget on something. That's usually possible, but not always. But generally speaking, you're not supposed to address things like, well, okay, there's $1 million in this bill for policy A and $2 million in that version of the bill for policy A. You're not supposed to come back and say, well, what about we do $1 million for policy A and $1 million for policy B, which doesn't appear anywhere in either bill? That's usually beyond the pale. And then, of course, there's wider questions like policy A appears in bill version 1, but policy A does not appear in version 2. Can you do you call that? Well, I mean, actually, I guess there you have a pretty clear-cut difference, and there's a question of will we include this or not. But if policy A appears in Bill 1, policy B appears in Bill 2, do you have a difference between the two as to policy A or policy B or both? That's not entirely clear all the time, and the parliamentarian sometimes has to step in and issue rulings on that. Those are the sorts of complications that can arise. What about if you have a purported health care bill from the House and a Chick-fil-A menu from the Senate? Well, is everything in contention? Is everything open to reinterpretation? Is everything that's not mentioned in the Senate bill a difference that's addressable in conference? We'll see how things are interpreted. So it may be that the less similar the two bills are, the better in conference, if you can get agreement among the conferees. And I'm not certain that you necessarily can. But remember, McConnell will largely have the ability to select the conferees he wants. It's subject to the approval of the full Senate and really, therefore, the full Republican conference. They'll be the ones providing the majority vote in favor of the motions to go to conference. But they may still be listening to McConnell at this point, particularly if he manages to engineer a win on the motion to proceed and then a win on something that doesn't hurt them politically at this point to vote for so that they can get to conference. They may decide to give a vote of confidence to McConnell for getting them to the point that just one or two more votes and we'll be done with something here. So that's how you can put together a bill in the end, even though there aren't 50 votes for anything in particular along the way. You've managed to scrape by on the motion to proceed, and if all you can do to muster 50 votes is this very narrow set of repeals, don't worry about it. We're going to have another crack at it in a little bit after the conference committee does its work. All right. Let's see. What other fun things can we round up? Michael Musson saying, I would also submit a blank amendment. Once the amendment is approved, then we'll talk about what it will say. And they might as well go ahead and do just that. And Pete tells me that they bailed on it on the reading of the bill after a while. I guess they, and in all likelihood, they did come to realize, well, all we're ending up doing here is eating up part of 20 hours that ends statutorily pretty soon. And then we could just handle the major votes on major provisions, major amendments as vote-a-rama votes, but we'd like to move on to the debate of that. I mean, remember that once you've got the motion to proceed underway, wasting any part of the 20 hours is kind of a wash. It's 20 hours regardless, so maybe they bailed on it after a while. Just after, I guess they thought they were making some kind of a point, or they simply said, yeah, we don't know what the hell's in this thing. I guess I would not agree to dispense with the reading on anything either, at least temporarily, until I got an inkling of what was actually in this thing, or they distributed a written copy to me, and it might be just about that. It might be literally, you're going to have to read this thing until you can get us the copies for us to review on our own, because that might not even have been available. I really don't know. All right, let's see. So I was going to dive into what Joan had provided us on the front page with respect to what's going on this morning. Let me just make sure it's still the latest and greatest. Senate Republicans move on to Trump care chaos with one goal in mind, giving it up to the House. There's more to getting out of the way of the House, and it's really actually kind of interesting to see Senate genius and brilliant tactician Mitch McConnell put in the position of ceding all of the Senate's traditional leverage over the House, which usually came from reconciliation and or stricter rules like the Byrd Rule. Gee whiz, our hands are tied. You people in the House aren't tied in the same way, but you're forced to acknowledge that the Senate's hands are tied, and you all have to comply with Senate reconciliation rules if you want to have any hope of your bill clearing our chamber, and that way the Senate has been able to dictate the terms for a long time, and he's now ceding that role because he's such a tactical genius. Joan writes, repeal and replace was roundly rejected by the Senate in its second procedural vote in the Trump care fiasco Tuesday night, 43-57. They brought the original McConnell version of repeal and replace. 9 Republicans, ranging from Senator Susan Collins of Maine on the right to Senators Tom Cotton, Rand Paul, and Mike Lee on the almost falling off the spectrum right. That's the proper way of expressing things. Most other outlets likely said from moderates like Susan Collins, who's not moderate, to, but yeah, that's better. Almost falling off the spectrum right. When we're talking about Tom Cotton, Rand Paul, and Mike Lee, all voted with Democrats on this proxy vote for the Better Care Reconciliation Act. That's what the Senate was calling it, or what Mitch McConnell was calling his version of things. The actual question before the senators was on whether to vote with Senator Ted Cruz in waiving the budget rules to allow his amendment to be voted on, but it served as a rejection of the BCRA in this form. I know, very complex and annoying, but well explained there. I think There could be other forms of the BCRA coming, according to Senate Republican aides who told Axios a simpler version, such as the one the Congressional Budget Office scored, is possible. The next major vote the Senate will take is kind of figured out on the updated version of the 2015 repeal-only bill, which is also expected to fail. That will be held early Wednesday afternoon. That's today. After that is kind of when all hell will break loose. There will possibly be some more amendment votes. Then a vote-a-rama on amendments to some of the as-yet undetermined base bill starting Thursday, possibly running into Friday morning. There is no clarity at all on what might be an actual base bill. The thing amendments would be attached to. It's the proverbial bowl of spaghetti being thrown at the wall at the moment. The Washington Post, is that what's in the proverb? Is it really a proverb even? Good question. It's an idiom at best. Is it's bowl of spaghetti that we usually throw to the wall to see what sticks? I don't know. It's better than some other things you could throw at the wall that are likewise tacky and viscous. Anyway, the Washington Post has a page devoted to tracking amendments that should be helpful in sorting the spaghetti. Oh, maybe I'll even open it up because it's linked in here, and I'm sure it's a handy tool. The question is, does it have auto-playing video attached to it at any point? It shouldn't, but that's usually a good signal that it will anyway. At this point, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's strategy seems to be giving every Republican the chance to offer an amendment so that they feel like they've had their shot, while ending up with what's been deemed skinny repeal, a very narrow bill that repeals the individual mandate, maybe the employer mandate, and some of the taxes. The outlines of that aren't even really clear at this point because it's going to be a matter of what will get 50 votes. And judging by what happened Tuesday on the motion to proceed, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell will bribe and bludgeon his conference enough to get that 50. That's not McConnell's end goal, however. He just needs something, anything, to pass the Senate so he can take it to conference and turn it over to the House maniacs. With just a shell of a bill from the Senate, the conference would have the power to create a new bill. It would have some restraints. It's still going to be written under budget reconciliation rules, so will still have to be okayed by the Senate parliamentarian and supposedly, maybe, I guess, reviewed by the Congressional Budget Office. McConnell has been more than willing to ignore the CBO in this part of the equation, adding just one more element of chaos and confusion. Confusion is his strongest weapon right now. It makes it easier for him to hide what he's doing. Democrats will take this opportunity to force some embarrassing votes, and there's a link there too. Let's take a look at that. For Republicans, these votes, frankly, are a lot tougher for them than they are for us, said Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. They are squeezed in both directions. Expect dozens, if not hundreds, of Democratic amendments in the vote-a-rama. And, of course, closing, by the way, with the note that more people support impeaching Trump than repealing Obamacare. But Republican senators insist on voting on repeal this week. Call your senators, and don't forget the number. It's very easy, and you can, by the way, reach both Senate and the House in this number. If you know who you want to speak to, if you know who your representative is, who your senator is, or which one you want to speak to, you can just tell the Capitol switchboard. This works all the time. 202. That's the area code for Washington, D.C. For those of you who've been reading the Daily 202, like Greg, and not recognizing the area code or not living in the area and dealing with it every day. 202-224-3121. 3121 is just that. It's basically like what you might find in any of the 555 numbers that you see used in television and movies, so that nobody gets bothered. You know, you don't no longer want to give out numbers like 867-5309 if you're old enough to know what that is. 224 is the exchange usually for the Senate side. 225 is usually the House side numbers when you're calling member offices. But the switchboard's 224. I think it might even work with 225. I don't know. I don't want to promise you anything. 202-224-3121. Hello, United States Capitol. The hell do you want? People are bothering the hell out of me. Oh, okay. I want to talk to my senator. Senator who? Well, what would be the most ridiculous thing at this point? I don't know. Anyway, you tell them who your senators are. Tell them who your representatives are if you need to call members of the House. And eventually we'll need to be calling members of the House again, because this does go back to them, and not only for conference but for a second vote in both houses after this. If this bill passes at all, if anything passes the Senate, then the House gets back in the act as well. And then, of course, by the way, the very important reminder that perhaps you want to kick in some dough, kick in some money for the efforts over at Daily Kos, both on, well, not only on healthcare, but on everything, all of our actions, and keeping people involved and keeping the publication running. We do need your donations to help do that, just as we do here on the radio show. But I would say, well, there's a larger ship to steer, of course, over at Daily Kos itself, and some of it helps to sustain the radio show. Some of it helps to sustain these campaign actions, and some of it just goes to sustain bringing you that great news and analysis that Joan is so busy with this morning. I feel bad for you, Joan. Hang in there. I know they're not making it easy for you over in the Senate. You have our support. Standing ovation for Joan. Forget John McCain. Standing ovation for Joan and her hard work here. Let's see. What else is up this morning? Mark Sumner also working on the subject. But this subject is Jeff Sessions, which is also big in the news, and we really haven't paid that much attention to Trump's ongoing effort to get Sessions to quit so that he doesn't have to fire him and look like an autocrat. I guess that's what's going on here. Sessions, though, is that boyfriend who refuses to admit it's over, according to Mark Sumner. Let's take a look at the latest on this. Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III, you know the guy, still hanging around, casting forlorn glances at the window, checking his messages every 5 minutes, rehearsing his next conversation. He has that box of chocolates ready. Meanwhile, his beloved has definitely moved on. Here's a quote from Axios. Boy, Axios getting a lot of play this morning. That's their goal. Attorney General Jeff Sessions doesn't plan to take the hint. President Trump continues hitting him in all body parts. Yeah, apparently hoping he'll resign, which could pave the way for firing Special Counsel Bob Mueller. It's not a coincidence that the thing Trump complains about, Mark says, Sessions recusing himself from the Russia investigation, is the thing that would make it rather awkward for the Attorney General to order Rod Rosenstein to order Robert Mueller to pack his bags. It's the only thing Trump is looking for in an Attorney General. And now this from the Washington Post, quoted in Mark's piece. I'm disappointed in the Attorney General, Trump said. If he was going to recuse himself, he should have told me prior to taking office, and I would have picked somebody else. It's a bad thing, not just for the president, but also for the presidency. I think it's unfair to the presidency. That's his excuse for all of this. Trump wants an AG who will fire Mueller. Sessions is in a position where firing Mueller would require really going far out on a limb of somehow this doesn't violate my recusal. Of course, Sessions already went out on that limb once to help Trump fire FBI Director James Comey, and Trump made it clear the firing was also about the Russia investigation. Maybe these two still can be reconciled. I guess that's entirely possible. There's more here. Let's see what else he's got in store for us below the fold. Scroll down. Trump wants just one thing out of the Justice Department, and Jeff Sessions is not delivering. So as Sessions turns his sad, sad face toward the White House, Trump continues to spurn him. Hear more from the Washington Post. Trump was asked at a Rose Garden news conference if he would fire the Attorney General, who angered the president by recusing himself from the criminal probe into possible connections between Trump campaign and Russia. We'll see what happens, said Trump, a potentially ominous choice of phrase, considering the president used the same expression when talking to FBI Director James Comey before he was fired. He doesn't know a lot of words, Donald Trump. Though Sessions is making a show of hanging in there, many expect that this show of gumption is designed to last until the Senate goes on its delayed August recess. That would give Trump the opportunity to replace Sessions with someone who will quickly pull the switch on Mueller and have it all done before the senators get back into town to express how disappointed they are, and then do nothing. So what about this? Is this a possibility, a recess appointment during the August recess? Highly questionable. It is within the power of the Democrats in the Senate procedurally to deny the Senate an opportunity to vote on a motion to adjourn formally for the month, which would perhaps require pro forma sessions to be held. I mean, McConnell was able to engineer it from the minority during the Obama presidency. And a recent Supreme Court case, the Noel Canning case, casts considerable doubt, if we're still following the law here. We never really know for sure. Casts considerable doubt on the ability of the president to make a recess appointment unless both houses are really unavailable to receive nominations and act on them in a timely fashion. And I'm not certain that even the August recess, if it were formally taken, would be enough these days to meet those tests. I don't know. It's very difficult question, or even with even in ordinary times when you don't have justices like Gorsuch, who God only knows what sort of interpretation he would give to that precedent. All right, let's ride over to Pocket and see. That's a good morning roundup. Although I will say the next story is rather intriguing. The Morning Digest from Daily Kos Elections. If you've seen it, you'll know why. If you haven't, I can only tell you what the headline says and what the photo illustrating the piece depicts. Morning Digest, all for none. Cosplaying Musketeer CEO won't run for Colorado governor. And that sounds awfully disappointing. What might that mean? Well, again, illustrated with a photo of, I don't know who, and only labeled as probable associates of Kent Thiry. Is that right? Thiry. 3 people dressed as, musketeers, and they are 3 in number. 3 shall be the number of the musketeers. That's what the story calls for. What's happening here? I'm just intrigued. I guess I'm going to have to read the Colorado entry. Colorado governor's race. Somehow Coloradans will need to make do without having a costume playing, that is, for those of you not up on the lingo, rich guy as their governor. That is disappointing. DaVita CEO Kent Thiry. It's spelled like 30 without that second T. Is what it looks like. Whose company is the world's second largest kidney dialysis firm, announced on Monday that he would not seek the GOP nomination for this open seat. Now, he's known for some rather eccentric behavior, it says here. He makes his employees sing DaVita's corporate song hundreds of times a year. Interesting. Sort of Japanese in that. I wonder if that's what the inspiration was. It's terrible, in the words of CBS Money Watch. And the song is terrible. The experience of having to endure it being sung is likewise terrible, I'm sure. But the song itself is said to be terrible. And he regularly wears a Three Musketeers costume around the office. Now, I'm not certain what that is supposed to mean. I don't know what that entails. The picture helps us think of what that might look like. Unless he's disguising himself as the candy bar, which is an option not herein presented, but I'm certain it occurred to David and Jeff and all the rest of the writers at Daily Kos Elections, which, by the way, might as well read it all off in case you were wondering. David Neer, Jeff Singer, Stephen Wolf, Carolyn Fiddler, and additional contributions from David Jarman, Steve Singeiser, Daniel Donner, James Lambert, and David Beard. So I don't know who came up with the Three Musketeers formulation. I'm sure really any one of them would have had it occur to them. We know these guys fairly well. You're thinking about the Three Musketeers. Can't see, that'd be great to go as a disguise as a candy bar. But okay. What does it entail? Like, what does he wear around the office? I'm really curious about that. Apparently he's not the only one who likes to suit up. In a skit performed at an employee meeting some years ago, according to the New York Times, a DaVita musketeer killed a federal bureaucrat. Oh, the race we could have had. Okay. What sort of costume do you wear as a federal bureaucrat? And I don't think that's even a candy bar at all. That would be a horrible candy bar, wouldn't you think? What could that be like? Maybe that was the original name for, like, I don't know. I'm going to insult somebody's favorite candy bar if I try to put a label on that one. Those federal bureaucrats filled with delicious nougat and chewy caramel. Well, it would popularize the federal bureaucracy anyway. So, I don't know how full bore he goes on dressing up as a musketeer. Does he just put on a wacky hat? Could it be said that he is perhaps dressed as a cavalier instead of a musketeer? I don't know. How do you distinguish between the two? I guess the more of the costume you put on, the more you... All right, well, what can I tell you? It's an odd way to spend your time. But so is running for governor of Colorado. For whatever reason, we seem to think that's normal. Not for this guy, though. Anyway, let's dive into Pocket and see what's available and catch up on other stories. And there are a lot. Shall we spend time on Trump-Russia today? Should we put our efforts elsewhere? Let's see. Here's a wacky story that I grabbed this morning, just by way of reviving everybody's interest this morning. BuzzFeed has this one. And you don't see headlines like this all that often, although we did just see the Three Musketeers headline. So maybe you didn't need this kind of comic relief, but you're going to get it anyway. Everything that's happened, Ryan Broderick is reporting for us, everything that's happened since a bunch of YouTubers got a ship to stop refugees getting to Europe. Story I noticed and might have filed in Pocket some time ago and never got to. Not just YouTubers, racist YouTubers. These guys got together, and I guess you have to credit them with the gumption to put their politics into action and actually do something in all this. It's just the problematic part of it is that it's racist and horrible. But at least they're trying to get other people's money to put where their mouth is. But that's the way we do things these days. What's happening here is really rather unbelievable. Actually, in May, far-right Canadian YouTuber Lauren Southern, who is in fact, obviously, Northern, being from Canada, but that's only part of the delicious irony in our racist Canadian YouTube candy bar. What planet am I? This is a weird world. In May, far-right Canadian YouTuber Lauren Southern went live on Periscope from a tiny boat in the Mediterranean Sea off the coast of Italy. Now, why would she do such a thing? It's a sort of a selfie-style, I guess, like infrared video of herself in the darkness, floating around. Looks like Canadian racist Blair Witch Project is what's going on here. And there's a screen cap of it to help illustrate the point if you can't imagine it for yourself. In her small boat were Italian, Austrian, and French members of a pan-European far-right group called Generation Identity. It's an international collection of racists who decided to get in a boat and take selfies of themselves. But Lauren Southern is our lead here because she appears to be a pretty blonde woman. So that's the face of racism these days. Generation Identity is part of a larger movement called the Identitarian Movement, because they invented the word because they're dumb and they need something. Should we call ourselves the racist movement? I think that will put us at a disadvantage. Okay, how about Identitarian? Sure. Which started in France in 2002. Now, normally these people hate things that start in France, but in this case, it's racism, so they're cool with it. The youth organization has chapters in most European countries. Its main focus for the last few years has been opposing immigration throughout Europe, particularly after the 2015 European refugee crisis. Why is their leader Canadian? Because she's blonde. Southern, who's Northern, and the Identitarians, who are racists, took their small boat out into the Mediterranean Sea and proceeded to shoot flares at a ship called the Aquarius. They didn't have the guts or munitions to shoot anything more powerful. They needed to be symbolically firing something at this ship, but they were too afraid to just go to straight piracy or murder. And so they're firing flares, which could likewise be dangerous, but they could claim, oh, I didn't know it was going to be dangerous to fire flares because I'm stupid. So they were firing at the 250-foot-long vessel, the Aquarius, operated by a charity, because they hate charity, called SOS Mediterranee. This is French, Mediterranee, and I got no idea how you would pronounce that, but obviously SOS Mediterranean. And the Doctors Without Borders, of course, also a part of this operation behind the Aquarius. So there you have it. Canadian and European racists getting together in a Blair Witch setting on a small boat to fire flares because they haven't had the guts to fire bullets at Doctors Without Borders. These people are winners all the way through. Southern and the members of the group were briefly detained by the Italian police after the stunt, and then they posed for photos with a banner and made sure that they put the blonde lady in the picture along with the unattractive schlubs that actually populate the group. They were released, according to this tweet from Luke Rudkowski. They were released with Laura Southern, and we'll find out what they are being charged with within 48 hours, according to this tweet. The point, however, was to promote their crowdfunding campaign called Defend Europe, headed by a Canadian again, which, as of this month, has raised $100,000 in donations. We're able to come out and sit in front of them with our flag, with our flares, with everything. Isn't that exciting? What an accomplishment. There are people coming to Europe as refugees aboard a boat, and with the $100,000 that they scraped up from, not you idiots, but not my friend idiots, but other people's idiots. We're all idiots, ultimately. We all live on this planet. It's no getting around it. We're responsible for what happens here. So they scraped up $100,000 from their idiots, and this is their big accomplishment. They can come out on a boat and sit in front of another boat with a flag and some flares. Southern told BuzzFeed News, and she was totally serious about this, in an interview in London in June. We wanted that picture of defiance so that we could fundraise for bigger projects. That's right. They were looking for $200,000 to be able to sit in front of them with more flares and a bigger flag. What an accomplishment. Southern and the identitarians are pushing a conspiracy theory that non-governmental organizations like MSF, that's French for Doctors Without Borders, don't make me speak French, please, aren't actually saving refugees at sea. What they're really doing is part of an illegal human trafficking operation, like Donald Trump's, which nobody seems to want to be talking about anymore for whatever reason. Anyway, according to Southern, the Canadian racist, in June, once the group has secured a ship, they would return to sea and stop NGOs from bringing refugees to Europe. In other words, I guess to summarize what's happening here and put it in terms we can all understand is this identitarian movement has found this blonde lady from Canada who's willing to propagate a Pizzagate theory of the refugee crisis. That when Doctors Without Borders and other charities are putting boats out to sea to try to save the lives of refugees who are already risking their lives to try to reach Europe by boat, what's really happening isn't that Doctors Without Borders are trying to save the lives of people who would otherwise likely capsize and drown on their way to Europe, but rather trafficking in those people, capturing them as slaves and trafficking them into I don't know what kind of slavery, sexual or otherwise, in Europe and elsewhere. And the fine, upstanding folk who are firing flares at the people who are being captured are really interested not in capsizing their boats and drowning them or setting them aflame, but saving them from a life of tyranny at the hands of Doctors Without Borders. That's the theory. It's Pizzagate on the seas. But at least it's launching its boats from Italy, so there's a more solid connection to the pizza, presumably, in Pizzagate, in the land of its origin. Although, honestly, we've done a lot better with pizza than Italy ever did, I think. But, okay, maybe your opinions would differ. Anyway, they go on to say, we're buying bigger boats. They're going to need a bigger boat. They actually got the chance to say that. They were going to buy bigger boats, more boats, in fact, nets to potentially stop the motors if there are smaller boats going out to Libya. And over the next few months, we're just going to be sending out more and more crews that I think will legitimately be able to stop these boats from going out, these NGOs, she said. So now she's going to try and stop the boats on their way to look for or pick up refugees. I don't know if they're really going to get to that stage, and I don't know whether they really are going to use their nets to try and stop up I guess the thought is they can try and tangle them in the propellers of boats on their way to pick up refugees wherever they may be finding them. And I don't know if that really is going to work, and I don't know whether that's really what they're going to use their netting for. But they're hoping, against hope, that they can sit in front of even more boats. That should be very interesting to watch. After the stunt in May, a spokesperson for MSF, Doctors Without Borders, told BuzzFeed News that nothing Southern was saying made any sense. Now, I think that that's likely true, and I'm not a doctor, but I'm able to tell that none of the things she says make any sense. We have nothing else to say on the matter, as we do not wish to engage in immediate war with far-right activists, the spokesperson said. Southern said that once the Defend Europe campaign, led by an Austrian identitarian named Martin Sellner, once they had raised enough money to buy a ship to go back out to sea, she would return to Sicily, which I guess is their base of operations. Can't wait to get that Canadian back to Sicily. Hooray. I like that they're out there trying to raise money to buy a ship. It's interesting. It's like privateer days. I need to be doing this to implement my Privateers of the Caribbean plan to steal offshore bank accounts. But actually, I don't really need boats for that. I need hackers. Anyway, in July, Defend Europe's crowdfunding campaign raised enough money to get a hold of a ship. But that's when things started getting really confusing. Okay. Sellner confirmed for BuzzFeed News that they have a 40-meter long ship called the Sea Star. And by the way, they should be measuring it in feet to be really identitarian. I don't know why they adopted the metric system if they really, but okay, it's a European identity. But still, they could hold themselves even further apart by adopting English measure. Anyway, Sellner said they had a 40-meter long ship called the Sea Star. That would be the letter C dash star, like C-SPAN, which they don't know about. That wouldn't make sense to them. They're Europeans. But the Sea Star. It's sailing, really motoring probably, under the Mongolian flag. Can you charter ships in Mongolia? Is Mongolia landlocked? I'm not 100% sure about that. I mean, my perception of it is, but now I'm going to have to go and Google this thing. But I guess they can charter ships, but why? Who makes the choice about what? Okay, so I guess maybe they did it because no country would otherwise allow them to sail under their flag, and the Mongolians either have no idea that they're doing this or don't care. In exchange for a payment, they'll charter your ship and let you flag it as Mongolian somehow. I don't know. That's a good question. Let's take a look at the map here, by the way. They may be entirely landlocked. I mean, shouldn't they be? My guess is that they are, but I don't know. Maybe I'm missing some sort of coastline. No, that's impossible, right? Given its location. Yeah, they're totally landlocked. Mongolian ships. Huh. I don't know. There should be some convention against that. But then I guess the UN is probably like, well, if they want to have ships out there, I guess that's their prerogative. Maybe they think that they can import goods cheaper if Mongolian flagged ships are bringing the goods to port in Korea, Japan, Russia, like Eastern Russia, and bringing it overland through China. I got no idea anyway, I'm sure there's no rule against their chartering ships and flagging ships. I'm curious about how they chose Mongolia. Maybe it goes on. Anyway, so here we are. They bought a ship. It's sailing under the Mongolian flag because identity. And it left from Djibouti. How do you pronounce that exactly? Djibouti? I know that sounds funny, but, and it made way for Catania, Italy. So in other words, they bought a ship cheap. They were these libertarians for keeping their bill as low. You know, it's a crowd-funded thing, right? So they're willing to buy probably derelict ships, but from Djibouti. I wonder about whether we can get a pronunciation on that. Of course, it's like, in case I'm mangling it so bad that you can't tell what I'm talking about, it's an East African country, and they managed to find themselves a boat. The only way they could, $100,000 to buy a boat and fund the whole operation, that's not a whole lot of money. So whatever, a 40-meter boat, I don't know what they go for. I guess the prices are lower in Djibouti. And that left them only with enough money to pay off the Mongolians to agree to allow them to flag the ship. That does get confusing. And then sail it to Italy. Helpfully, they've at least painted it white, I guess. Is this a picture of the ship itself, or maybe it's somebody else's ship? It's offered up here next in the piece in a way that makes you think that that's it. But, well, it doesn't say Sea Star on it. All right, well, whatever. Anyway, not beneath buying their boats in Africa and flagging them in Asia are these identitarians from Europe led by a Canadian whose name is Southern. This is, I think, all evidence for Oliver Willis's theory that these are all glitches in the matrix that we live in. We're living in a simulation. And I think he's got a pretty good list of evidence of a vast number of things that are like, that can't possibly be true, but are indeed, they are, but only because they're glitches in the matrix and signals to us that we're living in a simulation. Thank you, Michael, for telling me the D is silent, so it's just Djibouti, I guess. And have I got that part right? The D is silent, but am I pronouncing the rest of it wrong? I don't know. All right. Let's see. Oh, we've decided to go with no signal on our on the other PC here. That's where I was reading things, and we'll try and get that signal back so we can read what's going on without having to flip in between. Now, okay, no indication with this. So Rebecca notes quite correctly, this group is Nazi Greenpeace. Great idea. What could go wrong? Yeah, pretty much. All right. Let's see. So is this the boat? Did they ever tell about this? A UK anti-extremism NGO called Hope Not Hate, I hope it's not hate, said that the boat is owned by, this is even more, you're right, this is confusing. The boat is owned by a Cardiff-based company called Maritime Global Services Limited. That's an excellent name, of course, for a ship leasing company. So I guess they've leased it. And it was in Djibouti at the time that they leased it. I guess, whatever. Maybe they thought they were being consistent with their identitarian ideology by leasing a ship from a company in Cardiff, and the Cardiff guys were trolling these guys by saying, sure, the ship's available for you, all you gotta do is pick it up in Djibouti. Okay. So, where were we with this? A UK anti-extremism NGO called Hope Not Hate is the one that told us that the boat is owned by the people in Cardiff, Maritime Global Services Limited. The director of Maritime Global Services Limited is, of course, that very popular name in Cardiff, Sven Thomas Egerstrom, who told Hope Not Hate that he was aware of Defend Europe's intentions when he allowed it to charter the ship. So he's either okay with it or just doesn't care about anything. I don't see any problem with the vessel being in the area conducting legal research, Egerstrom said. Sounds like he's on board. We won't let our vessels get involved in any form of illegal activity at all. And if the vessel is involved in illegal activity, we fully expect the authorities to deal with that. With a ship now under their control, nominally, Southern and the Identitarians returned to Sicily, where they've been based for the last few weeks. Joining Sellner and Southern this time is an American far-right YouTuber named Brittany Pettibone, which again, so this is really, appears to be about getting attractive girls women, young women, to join these efforts so that the men's rights weirdos and other neck-bearded idiots who want to involve themselves in the racism will have something to look at while they're doing it. And if they, I guess they figure, if I'm racist enough, maybe I can score with this chick. And I don't know whether that has any basis in reality or not. They may be very strong-minded and independent young women, in quite apart from their racism. It's always possible. Southern, Selner, and Pettibone have been vlogging. That would be video blogging. It's, a portmanteau of sorts, except, I don't know, you should get hit in the head for even admitting that that's a word. Vlogging regularly. It's a lot less dirty than it sounds. From Catania, as they wait for the Sea Star to make it to Italy. They didn't have the guts, in other words, to head to Djibouti to sail back with the boat. But why should they? They basically bought Uber for racist boats, and they're going to come and get picked up. So, okay. Southern has also stated numerous times that while she is with the identitarians in Sicily and fully supports the Defend Europe campaign, she has no official involvement in it. So you can't arrest me. I'm just a Canadian weirdo hanging around with these identitarians who rented a boat from Djibouti, and we're waiting here in Sicily for it to show up and pick us up because we are adventurous activists, and we do what we say. We put our money where our mouth is, even though it's somebody else's money, and our mouths are in Sicily, not Djibouti, but whatever. Okay, you get the idea here. It's sort of a dilettante's effort. Anyway, also briefly joining the group was male online columnist, and I guess we have to clarify here, it's the Daily Mail, which we very often find puts up interesting reports of American gun violence, but is in fact a horrible right-leaning rag, as has been pointed out by a number of our British and British expatriate friends on the show. But one of their columnists, Katie Hopkins, who was slammed in the UK press for traveling down to Sicily last week and posing for selfies with this Defend Europe crew. Here's one of those sets of selfies, and it's being tweeted around with the message, having met the team of Defend Europe ID, that's a Twitter handle for them, at Defend Europe ID, now at Dockside in Catania with Save the Children and Vos Hestia, hashtag med, I don't know if that's medical or Mediterranean, about to set sail on a mission. So here she is taking a selfie with whichever one of the yahoos in this crew is the blonde lady. Is that the southern lady who's northern? The Sea Star seemed to be traveling smoothly until last week, that is, when it was detained in the Suez Canal, I guess on its way to Sicily from Djibouti. Here is a picture being tweeted by, I don't know who. Oh, yes. So someone with a camera and use of the Defend Europe ID Twitter account is actually on board the ship. Some unlucky slob who isn't taking pictures of himself. Might not be a slob necessarily, though I think he eats rather more of those, let's say, the Three Musketeers bars that we were talking about before, probably, than is healthy for you. But here's a picture on the road to hashtag Defend Europe, and it's a picture of some of the superstructure of the ship in some body of water. We don't know what. I guess that's purported to be the Suez Canal. On July 20th, Hope Not Hate reported that the boat was being held in Egypt by the Suez Canal Authority. How interesting. After several days stuck in limbo in Egypt, the Sea Star entered the Mediterranean, only it didn't go straight to Catania. Since Friday, it's been parked off the coast of Famagusta, Cyprus. And there's a map of the circuitous route that they have taken, included in here, from marinetraffic.com. Oh, I guess that means you can track the Sea Star some way online. Very interesting for those of you at home who want to play along. And I don't know what the hell they think they're doing, but it looks like I don't know, maybe they have the captain of the Exxon Valdez steering this thing because they're going all over the place. No idea what's going on. Anyway, according to the highly unreliable Defend Europe Twitter account, the boat is refueling, as they would now have to do for having sailed around in circles for so long. Parlio chiming in to say the Daily Hail, as he calls the Daily Mail, is a newspaper happy to employ Katie Hopkins after she called for a final solution for the Muslim problem. Okay, well that gives us context. If you were wondering if maybe the Daily Mail is just a terrible rag and they just selected some poor idiot to go and cover this thing because it's coverable and they have no particular personal interest in the mission, the answer is apparently not. Katie Hopkins is fully on board, not only on board, well, now in the metaphorical sense with the Sea Star, but on board with the program, having called for a final solution for the Muslim problem. And this is a pretty good solution. Sail a boat around and around in circles in an area where some Muslims come from, and then later come through into the Mediterranean and put your boat in front of another boat, which, you know, I don't know how familiar all of you guys are with maritime issues. I'm not. But my guess is if in the Mediterranean Sea, there's probably room to sail around other boats, even if they have flares. No indication yet that the boat is actually able to stop any other boats, but I guess if they have a 40-meter vessel, they could conceivably, if they're willing to risk their own safety, block another boat from making it to shore. But I don't know that, there's no indication so far that they're actually interested in risking their own safety. I should move on because this, I mean, as fascinating as this story of these weirdos really is, we shouldn't have spent this much time on it. Anyway, the situation back in Catania appears to be getting more and more frustrating for Southern, Pettibone, and the Identitarians, however. The mayor of Catania, Enzo Bianco, Enzo the Baker, many of you know him as, of course, he was famous from the Godfather pictures. This is the exact same Enzo. There's only one. Enzo Bianco. They didn't tell you what his last name is. We just knew he was Enzo the Baker. For your father. You remember the guy. Anyway, Enzo Bianco, mayor of Catania, released a statement last week calling the far-right activists vigilantes and vowing to stop the Sea Star from entering Catania's port. Now, I don't know if it really damages your reputation necessarily. In Sicily of old, let's say, maybe not today, modern New Sicily is very much anti-vigilante. But I don't know that vigilantes have a terrible name in Sicily, traditionally speaking. But these ones don't, because they're Canadians and weirdo Northern Europeans, and they got no business down here in Sicily. That I can believe. So they're not going to let them into port. So that means that the Identitarians and other dilettantes who are Instagramming themselves in Sicily are going to have to pack their bags, probably, and actually move someplace. So that's pretty scary. Over the past weekend, Patreon, the site that allows people to fund artists, and that's put in scare quotes, and I don't know if I like that. Patreon, of course, helps many of you fund this show. And I don't know if I would say we were artists necessarily, but we're not racist Greenpeace. Anyway, Patreon banned Southern and Sellner's accounts, which are the main source of their income. Good on you, Patreon. I had wondered when we moved over from Recurrency, which was a legitimately, we knew that it was founded and run by people who were, for the most part, actually pretty committed progressives, although I don't think their company was overtly progressive. Maybe it was. Patreon we had no real idea about, except that lots of progressives that I knew were using Patreon to fund their efforts. So we knew that it was at least neutral towards progressives. Anyhow, this, I think, good sign. It should motivate you, by the way, to go to patreon.com and donate to all sorts of artists who are not banned, including us. And you can find us by going to patreon.com/KagroX. And why not kick in, let's say, $5 a month or so. It's about, we've discussed this before, about 50 cents, a cheap can of soda per show if we are entertaining enough to keep you occupied for 2 hours a day or some portion thereof with the news and analysis that we provide. 50 cents, not too much to ask, I don't think. And Patreon does skim something off the top, and maybe we should feel good about that, knowing that they're willing to kick these sorts of weirdo, racist idiots off of their system. Interesting. They could be skimming money from them. I'm sure they did. And hopefully they'll make some sort of valuable, progressive donation with that money. I'm sure we should all be happy that they were skimming some of it, I guess, away from these racists, and now are simply going to close it down. All right. Here's Brittany Pettibone's tweet complaining about it. Patreon deleted Lauren Southern's, Martin Sellner's, and Patrick Lenart's accounts. Those are all their Twitter handles, by the way. But it's only made them more determined, so look out. Hashtag, I guess, Defend Europe. I added the look out. Gee whiz, they're only more determined. Who cares? Southern said she had received a statement from Patreon's Trust and Safety team that read, "Here at Patreon, we believe in freedom of speech. We are creating a platform that empowers creators to share and debate ideas. When ideas cross into action, though, we sometimes must take a closer look at what our creators are doing with the funds they earn through Patreon. It appears that you are currently raising funds in order to take part in activities that are likely to cause loss of life. We have therefore decided to remove your page from Patreon and paid out your final balance of $95 to you." And on Monday of this week, Pettibone tweeted that she and Southern were having to wear disguises around Catania because they believed police were trailing them. Oh, how sad. The Italian police, Brittany says, were trailing us, so Lauren and I went out in this super convincing disguise. And of course, they're only kidding. It's an opportunity to take Instagram-style photos of themselves in cool hats, sunglasses, and wigs that probably only helps excite the folks who are being hoodwinked into donating to such a cause. At least they can't do it via Patreon anymore. On Monday, Southern told BuzzFeed News that the group were now scared for their personal safety, which is fine by me. Quite frankly, it's a risky proposition they were engaged in the first place. If they were not willing to risk their lives for it, they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. There's some serious bull-essery, we'll have to say, going on here, she said. Good word, isn't it? There is a safety risk, and the media caused this, and they may seriously get a bunch of 20-year-olds killed, which, of course, was the goal in the first place, except they were thinking it was going to be brown 20-year-olds, other 20-year-olds. But now their lives are on the line. That's piracy for you. What can I tell you? No one could have guessed that chartering a ship from some weirdo outfit in Cardiff, Wales, from a Norwegian racist, I don't know whether it's Norwegian, a Scandinavian-sounding racist that was actually only available from Djibouti and had to sail through the Suez Canal under the flag of Mongolia in order to arrive in the Mediterranean Sea and try to intercede and stop refugee craft from landing in Europe by firing flares at them, could result in danger to anyone. How were they supposed to know? BuzzFeed News attempted to connect with Southern and identitarians in Catania on Tuesday, but after numerous attempts to contact them, Sellner said over text that the group had actually left Catania temporarily and were 3 hours south in Pozzallo. I'm guessing is a pronunciation. Pozzallo. Martin Sellner tweeting here. It's in German. Anyway, now here is a photo they share of the Aquarius in Pozzallo, which he spells with only one Z. The group appears to be trying to intercept the Aquarius again, the same boat they shot flares at in May. And if that's the ship, I would imagine probably firing flares at it. It's a pretty substantial boat. Firing flares at it will probably not do a damn thing, which is fine by me. It should continue, or not escalate from there. Really, honestly, I can't wait till they run out of flares. The group appears to be trying to intercept the Aquarius again, as we said. Here's a Defend Europe tweet that says at this very moment the Aquarius is arriving in Pozzallo, this time again with one Z. Since when is Pozzallo the closest safe port to the Libyan coast? Who cares? The answer is, go screw yourself. They're running their operation, and he's now concern trolling whether you're using too much fuel to run your operation or not. There are still many unknowns about almost everything to do with Defend Europe's campaign. More importantly, what exactly do the identitarians plan to do with the Sea Star? In May, Southern was under the impression that the ship was going to be used to block and disrupt other ships. That plan seems to have evolved considerably. Publicly, Defend Europe's social media accounts have said that the Sea Star's main purpose is to investigate what NGOs are really doing with the refugees they pick up at sea. Now, of course, if they come to land and offload those refugees, having the Sea Star isn't going to do you much good, although it does allow you to trail them to whatever port they're heading for and then get off of the Sea Star, leave the Mongolian flag behind on the boat, and I guess walk, drive, or otherwise track the immigrants. But whatever. I guess they could have done that without a boat, but at least now they can all go to the same port at the same time. Let's see. Where else are we with this? In July, Sellner told BuzzFeed News that the plan was to find refugees stranded at sea and use the Sea Star to take them to the Tunisian city of Sfax. S-F-A-X. I'm learning all sorts of geography here. S-F-A-X. In other words, and this is probably a more viable plan, honestly, they were going to patrol the waters like the Aquarius does in search of refugees. But the Aquarius, when they find refugees, takes them to safety in Europe, or relative safety anyway. The Sea Star will pick them up, and I'm sure people will get on the boat thinking they're going to be taken to Europe, but it will instead dump them in Tunisia. That'll be pretty interesting. That probably would put the participants at considerable risk as well when the refugees realize that they're being offloaded in Tunisia, and then perhaps disturbed by the idea, perhaps taking a look around and saying, I think we may outnumber the crew here, or at least I've got an inkling that the actual crew that actually run the ship don't have any particular allegiance to the people who have chartered the ship, and maybe we can throw them overboard. Since we're already in the neighborhood of piracy, we might as well try that out. And then wouldn't that be hilarious? And throw them all overboard, and then the refugees take possession of the Sea Star and sail it wherever they like. I don't know whether they're capable of doing so, but it's an interesting thought anyway. Just like the NGOs, says Sellner, we will, first of all, ensure that people are not in danger anymore without taking them on board. Oh, interesting. We primarily will try to call the Libyan Coast Guard. I'm sure they'll respond to you. And the Search and Rescue Central in Tunisia, if it's necessary to take them on board, which I'm sure it would be. We also took precautions in that case, Sellner said, but if they're really in nautical distress, why should they disagree when we save their lives and bring them to the next safest port? If they're really in nautical distress, that might even work. On the other hand, they might decide that they like your boat better, but whatever. Just saying, look out for that. And also sort of rooting for it. Okay, I admit it. On Wednesday, a Cypriot news agency reported that the crew of the Sea Star had been evacuated from the boat in Famagusta on the eastern part of Cyprus, and that the ship's captain had been arrested. When reached for comment, Sellner confirmed that the ship had been stopped in Cyprus. And then there's another embedded tweet here, but it's in foreign language that I don't recognize and can't. Oh, it's Turkish, and I couldn't possibly read it to you. There's the boat, though. We do see a picture there, the Sea Star. It, too, a rather substantial craft, but I don't think it's actually as big as the Aquarius, although a collision between the two would no doubt be calamitous. It's the same thing like the Suez Canal, Sellner said. False allegations that lead to repression to delay us. The company will go to court against that. Well, good luck with your $95 from Patreon in court. When asked to clarify his comments, Sellner declined. The Asian training crew who left the ship in Cyprus was harassed at the airport. Oh, they're willing to use Asians as their crew, I see. No surprise there. NGOs tried to convince them to apply for asylum, the group posted on Twitter, which you would actually have been happy had they applied for, because then they could continue to run your boat. But instead they left. So now you got a boat and no crew, and you're in Cyprus. Defend Europe did not specify what NGO it was referring to. The Sea Star was expected to reach Catania this week, somehow, with a different crew, I guess. At this point, it's anyone's guess what will happen next. Once again, they're tracking it on marinetraffic.com. So I guess you can actually do that, and there are some... what do you have to say in the, if you're looking for, can you just track it by the name of the boat? I'm not really sure. I'll check that out after the show. You should too. So that's where they stand. That is pretty confusing and funny / dangerous, possibly incredibly stupid. And I guess, there's a possibility that everybody involved gets killed. Dang. That would be terrible. That's all I'll say about that. Let's see if we can catch up on a couple of other comments. Hey, it's Darwin Darko commenting on what here? But her emails. Let's see. Only the latest of Donald J. Trump dismantling progress. What are we looking at here? Is this a Twitter moment you've brought us from U.S. News 5 minutes ago? Well, it was 5 minutes ago when you sent it. Trump bans transgender people from serving in the U.S. military. Okay. Well, thank you for putting that one on our radar. We'll have to get an in-depth treatment of that to discuss on the air. Justice, speaking of the disguises, says, I always like this disguise. So real. It was, of course, the James O'Keefe putting on the Osama bin Laden mask and purporting to be crossing the Rio Grande as Osama bin Laden and somehow attracting no attention whatsoever from law enforcement officials, thus proving the point that James O'Keefe can wade through a river, I guess, with a dumb mask on. And I don't think anybody doubted his ability to do that before. All right, well, that was an interesting twist on things, just to kind of keep you up to date on what are alt-right weirdos up to these days. And the answer is stealing money from other dummies with pictures of attractive women and sailing around in the Mediterranean, which is not a bad job if you can make it work for yourself. Though it does sound a little bit frustrating on a number of levels. But they're into at least one of those types of frustration they seem to be absolutely dedicated to sustaining. So good luck to you with that, kids. One day I hope you grow up. Let's see, another piece of information in the news that I think is worth entering on the record, even if it doesn't help us solve any of our major constitutional crises. This news confirmed now by Reuters. I did see it mentioned on Twitter yesterday. Looks like a lot of fun. U.S. Energy Secretary, that's Rick Perry, in case you forgot. U.S. Energy Secretary duped into fake interview with Russian comedians. They were posing as Ukrainian government officials, as I understand, and just put a phony phone call, prank phone call, somehow got through to Rick Perry, Secretary of Energy. U.S. Energy Secretary Rick Perry optimistically discussed expanding American coal exports to Ukraine. Yeah, I'm sure it's happening. And other energy matters during a lengthy phone call this month with a Russian prankster who Perry thought was Ukraine's prime minister. You might have seen me tweet about it last night. Hello, I am being Ukraine prime minister. I can talk to U.S. Amerikansky Rick Perry. I mean, this probably worked with him, although I'll bet you the Ukrainian was able to put on a much more convincing Russian accent than I am. Perry actually was talking with comedians known in Russia for targeting celebrities and politicians with audacious stunts. Energy Department spokeswoman Shaylin Hines, you would not believe how many Y's there are in this person's name. Shaylynhynes. That's a lot. Shaylin Hines said in a written statement, pranksters Vladimir Krasnov and Alexei Stolyarov, only one Y between the two of them, are sometimes called the jerky boys of Russia, which, if you don't know that, if you're not old enough to remember the jerky boys who were prank phone callers who tried to break into, I think, movies and television at one point, but made a name for themselves releasing albums full of recordings of their phony phone calls. They were very funny. I mean, they were right. They recognized they were self-aware in having named themselves the Jerky Boys. It was annoying, I'm sure, to get those phony phone calls. The Jerky Boys of Russia. It's not just here's a bunch of Russian jerks. There's a backstory to it. Named after, of course, the American duo who put out recordings of their prank phone calls in the 1990s. They have made faux calls. I don't know if I like that. Faux calls. They're real calls. And whatever. To British singer Elton John, who thought he was speaking to Russian President Vladimir Putin, and others. Anyway, these individuals are known for pranking high-level officials and celebrities, particularly those who are supportive of an agenda that is not in line with their governments. In this case, the energy security of Ukraine, Hines said. During the 22-minute call on July 19th, Perry, whose department oversees the U.S. nuclear weapons program, by the way, discussed a range of topics in a business-like tone, including sanctions against Russia and helping Ukraine develop oil and gas. Perry said the Trump administration opposes Nord Stream 2, a Russian project to bring natural gas to Europe across the Baltic, and that the U.S. technology could help Ukraine develop gas. Let me see if I even understand that. Perry said the Trump administration opposes Nord Stream 2, a Russian project to bring natural gas to Europe across the Baltic. The U.S. could, still don't really get it, but okay, giving Ukraine some options with some of our technology is, I think, in everyone's best interest, with the exception of the Russians, but that's okay, he said. Okay, well, good. That ought to be the vantage point from which we discuss these things, but it won't be in the Trump administration. Now, it may put his job in jeopardy, but no one cares. Besides which, this isn't really his job. Energy Secretary deals with a very different portfolio. Perry just doesn't know that. Perry also discussed the Paris Climate Accord and coal exports on the call. The call, first reported by E&E News, was recorded and posted online. It is linked herein. It happened after about a month after Perry met with Ukrainian President Petro. Really, that's another glitch for the Matrix. Petro Poroshenko and his delegation at the Energy Department. His name is really Petro. I'm not so sure about that. I guess it is, but I'm not so sure that I believe that this is reality anymore. President Donald Trump said last month that Washington plans to offer Ukraine more coal exports from the United States because the Eastern European nation's industrial sector has difficulty securing coal from separatist-held regions. It is unclear how the United States would bring more coal to Ukraine, but Perry hinted on the call that the Commerce Department was working on it, which is, of course, not his department. The coal conversation at this particular point of time is with Secretary of Commerce and coal mining owner Wilbur Ross, the owner of the Sago mine. I full well expect it will go forward, he said on the call. News of the call came the same day that the U.S. House of Representatives voted overwhelmingly to impose new sanctions on Russia. All right. Oh, a note from Joan. That beep is Joan's message coming through on Twitter. Let's see. If I have a moment, would the Trump Care conference report? Oh, okay. I have to actually answer this question. Let's pose the question for us all to ponder, I guess. Unless it's super secret or something. And maybe, all right. Well, it couldn't be of very much interest, I guess, but questions about the Trump Care conference report under reconciliation rules. Okay. Well, we'll have to puzzle that out. And we'll try and help Joan out with that, but she knows we've got to wind up the show here in the next couple of minutes. And we will do that, I promise, although we have taken some very interesting turns out of pocket today. I better skim it just in case to see what else, if anything, needs to be mentioned. I should put on record here this real winner from Trump last night. Daniel Dale, as always, doing a fantastic job documenting the atrocities of Donald Trump. And he's Canadian too, right? Or at least is the correspondent for the Canadian paper, Toronto Star. He may very well be American himself and working for the publication, but who knows? Maybe he's Canadian. We salute the rest of Canada except for what's her name, Lauren Southern. And probably there are a few other exceptions as well. My Canadian friends could probably call them out by name. I welcome you to do so. Anyway, last night Trump wound up the evening with another rally, a campaign style rally. I believe he was in Ohio this time, and told his usual whoppers, and Daniel did his best to document all of them. Probably the most outrageous of the bunch is that he is adding a new story to his repertoire. The main thrust of Daniel's tweets last night was that he was doing all his hits, all of his standard lies that he loves to repeat in his appearances at rallies and sometimes in interviews with journalists, even the ones that have been debunked to his face. He likes to continue to tell, but this is a new one, ramping up the anti-immigrant rhetoric. Tonight, Daniel says the president told a graphic tale about sadistic illegal immigrants torturing beautiful teen girls. And of course, what would grab Donald Trump's personal interest more than beautiful teen girls? We don't want beautiful teen girls tortured. We want ugly, horrible immigrant girls tortured. I think that's what he's trying to say. But we can't be sure because he never really gets around to the point. But I think that's the case. But this is language very clearly designed to provoke a reaction among his white audience, a white racist audience on top of all of that. And I think it was pretty correctly pointed out, that was that was what was going on here, and that he's all right. Well, at any rate, here's the deal. The actual quote from the rally yesterday, and should we even bother doing this in Trump voice? The predators and criminal aliens who poison our communities with drugs and prey on innocent young people. I'm going to skip the voice on this one. These beautiful, beautiful, innocent young people. Again, and that's probably not even in the script, but he just loves to add that stuff. You know, it's terrible when beautiful, beautiful young girls have something go wrong with their lives. It's terrible. Anyway, but listen to this. These beautiful, beautiful, innocent young people will find no safe haven anywhere in our country. We're doomed. America's a hellhole. You're all going to get murdered. That's what he's saying. We'll find no safe haven anywhere in this country, not even in Trump Tower. No safe haven from what? And you've seen the stories about some of these animals. I think I am going to throw the voice into this one. Have you? Have you seen the stories? I have not. They don't want to use guns because they're too fast and it's not painful enough. He's writing a snuff film in this. So they'll take a young, beautiful girl. That should be illegal for Donald Trump to even talk about 15 and 16-year-old girls. They'll take a young, beautiful girl, 16, 15. I'll even dare to say 15, below the age of consent. Wow. And others, of course. And they'll slice them and dice them with a knife because they want them to go through excruciating pain before they die. And these are the animals that we've been protecting for so long. What are you talking about, you nut? We've been protecting ourselves. Well, they're not being protected any longer, folks. He's basically trying to draw out, I assume, though, the white men in the ground. We need to protect the white women. A very familiar refrain, of course, among racist idiots and people who have been moved to insane levels of violence by this sort of rhetoric throughout our history. And somebody was pointing out last night on Twitter, and I assume that they're right about this thing. People see these sorts of things and say, damn you, it's Bannon that's doing this sort of thing. But they were pointing out, I guess their superior knowledge of the situation is that this is more likely, this is a Stephen Miller operation, and he tends to write these things up, according to this person anyway, for these purposes, for Donald Trump to, and you know that he would love a salacious story of any kind about 15 and 16-year-old beautiful young girls. And it's really sort of disgusting to even imagine those words coming out of his mouth. Even more disgusting that it's something quite like this. I had to put that one on the record. A bit of a depressing point to end it with. Thankfully, most of the racists who end up taking action on these things are as incompetent as these Defend Europe ID people who have been sailing around in the Mediterranean since forever. And I hope it stays that way. What else are you going to hear when you stay tuned, as you always do, to Netroots Radio for the rest of the day? It's the Wednesday version of the after show. Here's what they've got coming up for you next. Even though the vote on the motion to proceed on the mystery healthcare bill split 50-50, senators voting to save Obamacare represent 36 million more people than the senators voting to destroy it. A good point. The Trump administration moves closer to undoing the Obama-era overtime pay rule, and Republicans are strangely silent about Trump's Boy Scout speech. Yeah, that's true. But remember that time in 2009 when hundreds of thousands of conservatives kept their kids home after Obama told students to work hard and stay in school? We do. I do too. Good call. Great comparison there. Indoctrination. It's awful.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Thank you very much for listening. I know we went sort of far astray from our usual menu of things here, but I thank you for hanging in there. We sometimes have to bring you the esoteric and weird from around the world. Speaking of which, Angela Marks, Angie in Washington State, the political guest on the last half of the after show coming up next.